I didn't expect silence to be the hardest part. Not the pain, not the awkwardness of being unable to move freely, not even the humiliation of depending on someone else to walk across the room, but the silence. The kind that settled in my apartment like dust after I returned from the hospital. Every hour blurred into the next. Every sound, the ticking of the wall clock, the occasional passing car, felt too sharp against the absence of everything else. And in that stillness, it became alarmingly clear I couldn't do this alone. My name's Alex. I'm 35 years old, generally independent, maybe a little stubborn, and up until 6 weeks ago, the kind of person who would rather suffer in silence than ask for help. Then came the surgery. It wasn't elective. After nearly a decade of ignoring persistent back pain, pushing through workouts, skipping physical therapy, pretending I wasn't hurting, my body decided to make the final call. One wrong twist, lifting a box of old college books, and everything collapsed. Literally. A herniated disc turned into full-blown nerve compression, and one emergency MRI later, I was being prepped for multi-level spinal fusion surgery. The doctors said I'd walk again. Eventually, that the recovery would be long and uncomfortable, and that for the first 6 to 8 weeks, I'd need help with, well, everything. They said it clinically, like they were reading bullet points. No one prepared me for the emotional undertow that followed. I returned home from the hospital to a quiet apartment that no longer felt like mine. I couldn't bend, twist, or lift anything heavier than a coffee mug. Getting into bed required a specific technique. Getting out required luck. The bathroom became a puzzle I wasn't equipped to solve. My friends? Supportive, yes. Available for weeks of daily care? No. My family lived 3 states away. And so, after a few humiliating days of struggling on my own, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a home health care agency. Hi, I said, try not to sound desperate. I think I need help. What they sent me was Jamie. I remember the first moment he walked into my apartment. Not because of how he looked or what he was wearing, but because something about the way he moved immediately settled the unease that had been growing in me since I left the hospital. He didn't flinch at the awkward silence. He didn't comment on the stack of unopened mail or the fact that I hadn't figured out how to brush my hair that morning. He smiled, calm, professional, and said, "You must be Alex. I'm Jamie. Let's get you back on your feet." It wasn't just the words. It was how he said them. Like I wasn't a burden. Like this wasn't something shameful. Like I was still a whole person. The first day, he didn't ask many questions. He just watched, listened, took note of how I moved, how I hesitated before sitting down, how I clenched my jaw when I had to lift my arm higher than my shoulder. Then he began making small adjustments. Rearranged the kitchen so the essentials were within reach. Left water bottles next to the bed. Marked times on my medication chart. He didn't invade, he adapted. In the beginning, I tried to keep a distance. This was, after all, a professional relationship. He was here to help. I was here to recover. I didn't need a friend. I needed mobility. And yet, by day 3, I found myself talking more than necessary. Not just about the medication schedule or the physical therapy regimen, but about random things, my college years, how I hated elevators, a podcast I used to listen to. He never pushed, but he always listened. And slowly, I began to realize how much I missed that. Being heard. There was a quiet rhythm to the days. He'd arrive in the morning, help with the morning routine, guide me through stretches, prep something I could eat, and organize the space to avoid accidents. Then he'd leave, and I'd count the hours until he returned the next day. Not because I needed help showering or getting to the couch, though I did, but because his presence made everything feel less exposed. The tension didn't come from attraction, not at first. It came from being seen, fully. When you're in pain, your walls fall fast. You can't pretend. You can't hide. He saw me try not to wince. He saw when I gave up trying to lift the spoon. He noticed when my voice got tight from fatigue, and instead of ignoring it or trying to fix it, he just sat nearby, present, patient, steady. By the end of the first week, he knew my schedule better than I did. He remembered which meds made me nauseous. He could tell when my back was stiff just from the way I held my shoulders. I caught myself anticipating his footsteps in the hallway, listening for the soft knock on the door. One day, I asked him why he did this work. After my grandfather got sick, he said, adjusting the pillow behind my lower back, he wanted to stay at home. I took care of him until the end. It changed something in me. I realized we talk a lot about health, but not enough about dignity. I wanted to be the kind of person who gave people both. That stuck with me. Dignity. It was something I felt I'd lost. But around Jamie, I was beginning to remember it. Then came the first setback. It was nothing dramatic. A poorly executed attempt at independence. I tried to pick up the remote that had fallen just out of reach. Twisted just slightly. The pain that followed was a white flash that sent me gasping back to the couch. I didn't call Jamie. I didn't want to bother him on his day off, but I must have looked shaken the next morning because the second he walked in, he stopped in his tracks and asked, "What happened?" I tried to lie. I told him I was fine. He didn't argue, didn't scold me. He just sat down across from me, waited, and said, "Tell me the truth when you're ready." Then he adjusted the heating pad and went to boil water for tea. That night, I cried after he left. Not from pain, from the overwhelming realization that I didn't want to go back to being alone. Not in the way I had been before, but I was still recovering. He was still my caregiver. Whatever was building between us, and I wasn't yet ready to name it, lived in the space between tasks. The way our conversations stretched longer than they needed to. The way he paused sometimes, like he wanted to say more. The way I watched the door longer than necessary after he left. Still, nothing happened. Nothing obvious. And yet, everything was shifting. One morning, as he helped me settle into the chair by the window, I found myself saying, "It's strange. I've spent years avoiding help, and now I can't imagine getting through a day without it." He looked at me then, a long, quiet look that didn't feel professional. Not inappropriate, just sincere. "You're not the only one learning," he said. And then he reached for the timer to start my stretches, and the moment passed. Or maybe it stayed, quietly reshaping what was coming next. But I knew this. Something real had started. Not loud, not sudden, just steady, just strong, like recovery itself. Not always visible, but undeniable when you stop and feel it. And I was starting to feel it. By the third week, I had learned to mask discomfort with silence. That morning started like most others. Jamie arrived precisely on time, his knock soft and familiar now. He asked the same questions, how I'd slept, whether the pain had lessened, if I'd managed the stretches without strain. I gave the same answers, vague, brief, mostly accurate. But that day, he paused when I didn't meet his eyes. I was standing by the sink, gripping the counter with both hands, tried to lean forward just enough to reach my head with a washcloth. My movements were stiff, clumsy. Water dripped down the back of my neck. I could feel frustration mounting, the kind that sneaks in not because of the task itself, but because of what the task represents, the growing realization that something once effortless now required strategy. I hadn't washed my hair properly in days. Dry shampoo and awkward angles were losing the battle. I hated how greasy it felt, how the weight of unwashed strands reminded me that I still wasn't capable of doing something as basic as caring for myself. I hated that I cared. "You okay?" Jamie asked quietly from the doorway. I nodded without looking. He watched for a moment longer, then stepped into the kitchen and said, casually, as though suggesting I try a new brand of tea, "I could help you wash it." I froze. He didn't elaborate, didn't move closer. Just stood there, offering help in the most ordinary way. Like it wasn't a big deal. Like it didn't require surrendering another fragment of dignity. I turned my head slightly, enough to glance back. "It's not necessary. I can manage." He gave me a look, patient, not pushy. "I know you can, but you don't have to." The words sat between us. I felt the tension in my shoulders, in my jaw, in the part of me that still wanted to prove I could do this on my own. But I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of feeling like I had to earn the right to be taken care of. "Okay," I said, finally, "but only if it's not too much trouble." He smiled gently. "It's not." A few minutes later, the setup was done. A kitchen chair near the sink, a folded towel for support, shampoo and conditioner nearby, a cup to help with rinsing. No unnecessary words. No commentary. Jamie moved with quiet efficiency, narrating each step only when needed, as though this were just another part of the routine. I sat in the chair, neck resting against the rolled towel. My spine protested, but only slightly. I exhaled slowly, focusing on keeping still. Jamie adjusted the water, testing the temperature carefully before letting it flow over my scalp. The first touch, his fingers against my hair, was practical. Firm, steady. He applied the shampoo with care, working it through slowly. There was no awkwardness in his movements, no hesitations. Just the soft sound of water, the occasional shift of his feet, and the quiet rhythm of his hands. I didn't speak. Neither did he. There was no need. In the silence, something unexpected happened. Not between us, but within me. I felt the weight of the last few weeks begin to loosen. The constant pressure to perform, to recover quickly, to stay composed. It slipped away in pieces like old dust rinsing down the drain. Jamie poured water slowly over my head, guiding the rinse with practiced movements. His fingers moved through my hair again, smoothing out the remaining lather, gently working out a stubborn knot near the back. I flinched slightly. "Too much?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just surprised." He nodded, continuing. I could feel the heat of the water, the scent of the shampoo filling the space. Not overwhelming, but grounding. And beneath it all, the quiet presence of someone choosing to be here. Not because he had to, because he wanted to help. I closed my eyes, and for a few minutes, I wasn't thinking about healing timelines or mobility goals. I wasn't calculating the distance between where I was and where I wanted to be. I wasn't even thinking about Jamie. I was just there, letting someone care for me. Not because I'd earned it, not because I needed to repay it later, but simply because I was allowed. He finished rinsing and helped me sit upright again. I reached for the towel automatically, but he was already there, gently patting my hair dry with deliberate care. His movements slowed as he reached the crown of my head. There was something in the way he did it, not overly cautious, not clinical, just present. Then came the pause. He stood still for a moment, towel in hand, as though waiting to be sure everything was fine. I looked up, reflexively, and our eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. No hidden meanings flashed between us. But in that brief second, I saw something I hadn't expected to find. Understanding. Not sympathy, not pity, but recognition. That quiet acknowledgement of another person's exhaustion, their effort to keep going, their desire not to fall apart in front of someone else. He didn't say anything, just folded the towel, set it aside, and helped me stand. I moved carefully, cautiously, testing my balance. No pain this time, just stiffness. I nodded. "Better," I said. He gave a small smile, then stepped back. "Any soreness? Let me know later. Warm compress might help." "I will." He turned to clean up, and I went to the couch to rest. I thought that would be the end of it, a task completed, another step in the recovery process. But the memory lingered, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. There had been no performance, no false cheer, no commentary about how brave I was or how strong. Just a task done with dignity, and a silence filled with something gentler than sympathy. Later that afternoon, while Jamie adjusted the pillow behind my back, I found myself saying, "Thank you." For earlier. He paused, then replied simply, "Of course. I mean it. That was hard. You made it less so." His expression softened. That's part of it. Helping people feel human again. That's the real work. And it was because that's what he had done. Not just helped me clean my hair, but reminded me what it felt like to be cared for without judgment. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of discomfort, but because something had shifted. Quietly, gently, irrevocably. It wasn't about Jamie. Not entirely. It was about what his actions had awakened. A part of me that remembered trust. Not as a concept, but as a lived experience. I lay in the dark, replaying the feel of warm water, the stillness of that moment, the ease that had settled over everything. And I realized that something had begun, something fragile and unspoken. Not a romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But a connection built not on what was said, but on what was offered freely, without expectation. And I knew then that healing wasn't just about walking again or learning how to bend or lift. It was about remembering how to let people in. Jamie had done that. Not with words, Not with promises, but with presence. With a simple, unremarkable gesture that became unforgettable. With a touch of care. Something shifted after that day at the sink. It wasn't dramatic. No confessions. No sudden changes in behavior. But the rhythm between us altered in small, noticeable ways. Not in what was said, but in the spaces between things. He still arrived each morning as he always had, carrying the same calm energy, asking the same questions. I still followed the routine, stretches, medication, slow walks across the apartment. But now our conversations had pauses that felt fuller. Our silences seemed to carry more weight than our words. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way Jamie's eyes lingered a fraction longer when I answered a question. The way he sometimes hesitated before speaking, as if testing his own thoughts before letting them out. The way his hand would rest gently on my shoulder for just a second longer than needed when helping me balance. None of it crossed the line. None of it demanded anything. But it was there, and I wasn't innocent in it either. I found myself watching him more closely, picking up on his habits. I noticed how he always double-checked the stove, even when he knew it was off. How he'd tap the side of his coffee mug once before taking a sip. I caught myself inventing small reasons to keep him in the room longer. Asking about a recipe, pretending I couldn't reach something I almost certainly could. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The awareness lived in the glances, in the shifting air between us. In the way we each recognized something rising quietly, not yet ready to be named. Then came the walks. By week 4, I was cleared to walk short distances outdoors with assistance. It became a new ritual, early evenings, when the air cooled and the streets quieted. Jamie would guide me down the steps, walk beside me slowly as we made our way around the block. At first, it was about recovery, getting the legs moving, testing strength and balance. But it became something else. We didn't talk much during the walks. Sometimes we discussed small things, what I'd be able to do next week, whether I felt ready for stairs without support, if I was sleeping better. But more often, we walked in companionable silence, letting the rhythm of our steps fill the space. It was during one of those walks that it happened. We had reached a bench near the edge of a small park. Ducks drifted across a pond nearby, and the air smelled faintly of grass and evening. Jamie gestured for us to sit, and I lowered myself down carefully, grateful for the rest. We sat for a few minutes in silence. He didn't check his phone. I didn't pretend to look around. We just sat. I could feel his presence beside me, steady, familiar. Then he said it, softly, almost as if to himself. You're improving fast. In another week or two, you'll probably be mostly independent. I nodded. That's the goal. He paused. It also means I might not be the one helping you anymore. I turned slightly toward him, surprised. There's a transition point, he continued. The agency usually shifts full-time cases to part-time support when patients regain mobility. Someone else would come in, a few hours a week, just for strength exercises or tasks that still require assistance. He didn't look at me as he said it, just kept his eyes on the water. But the tone in his voice said more than the words. I understood immediately. This wasn't just a clinical update. It was a message wrapped in protocol. I see, I said quietly. He nodded. It's for the best. There was a pause, not awkward but heavy, like both of us had stepped closer to something unnamed and now didn't know what to do with it. I wanted to ask, why not you? I wanted to say, I don't want someone else. But I didn't, because I knew why. And so did he. The boundary had held, but barely. Not because we didn't respect it, but because something human had slipped through the cracks. Something neither of us had planned for. His role, caretaker, had limits. And whatever was building between us had no place inside those limits. I looked at him, studied his profile in the fading light, and wondered what would happen if we were different people, meeting under different circumstances. But we weren't, and we hadn't. So instead of speaking, I simply said, "Makes sense." He finally turned to look at me then, and for a moment, everything we hadn't said passed between us. There was no need for confession. The understanding was already there. That night, when he left, the goodbye felt heavier, like something was shifting into place, even if we didn't yet know what shape it would take. The days that followed had a different energy. Still professional. Still consistent. But now the silence between us wasn't passive. It was waiting. Every task, every conversation, every interaction felt touched by the weight of unspoken possibility. He didn't linger as much. I didn't invent reasons to make him stay. We both moved carefully, as though navigating a fragile space we didn't want to crack. But the tension was still there, subtle, quiet, undeniable. One morning, he brought fresh bread from a bakery near his apartment, set it down casually with the tea, and said, "Thought you might want something different today." It wasn't dramatic, just a loaf of bread, but the gesture made my chest ache. Because it wasn't about nutrition. It wasn't even about kindness. It was about knowing me well enough to know I needed something comforting that day, even if I hadn't said a word. And I realized with a quiet kind of clarity that this, whatever this was, had become important to me. Not in the abstract, not in a lonely, post-surgical gratitude kind of way, but in the real, steady, unmistakable way of caring about someone not because they help you, but because you see them and want to keep seeing them. But I also knew we weren't ready. Or rather, we weren't allowed to be. Not yet. The rules were there for a reason. The boundary mattered. And if we crossed it now, it would ruin everything. So I said nothing. And neither did he. But the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. It wasn't a surprise when Jamie brought it up. I had expected it. Not because I wanted it, but because everything between us had begun to tremble under the quiet weight of what hadn't been said. He sat across from me, finishing the last notes in my recovery chart. I could tell something was different. There was a kind of stillness to his movements that didn't come from fatigue or distraction. It was the stillness of someone who had made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to speak it aloud. He closed the folder, placed his pen on top, and looked up. "I've spoken to the agency," he said. "They'll be assigning someone else to finish out your care." I didn't answer at first. My breath caught. Not from surprise, but from how final it sounded. When? I asked quietly. Tomorrow. A beat passed between us. A pause that stretched too long for a professional handoff. His eyes didn't leave mine. "It's the right time," he added. "You're more independent now. You're cleared for almost everything. The next phase is mostly check-ins and strengthening." I nodded slowly. "And they're sending?" "Elena," he replied. "She's good. Calm. Knows her work. You'll like her." I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. He was doing what neither of us could bring ourselves to explain fully, preserving the space between us by stepping away from the role that made anything else impossible. I sat with it for a moment. "Okay," I said, and that was it. The next morning, Elena arrived with a clipboard and a calm voice. She was kind, efficient, the kind of person who could fill a room without making it feel crowded. Jamie walked her through everything. The exercises, the medication logs, the stretches that caused discomfort. I watched them from the couch, hands folded, saying little. At one point, Jamie glanced over at me as he explained something about the ice pack schedule. I gave a small nod, "Go ahead, finish," and he did. When it was done, he turned to me. "You're in good hands." "I know," I said. There was a pause. He hesitated, then added, "I'll be in touch." Not a promise, not an invitation, but not a goodbye either. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. "You up for coffee tomorrow?" Somewhere neutral. No charts, no meds. Just us. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Yes, tomorrow sounds good." We met at a small cafe 2 blocks from my building. It wasn't fancy or hidden or particularly quiet. Just a place. And for the first time, he wasn't walking in with a folder or a plan. He arrived a few minutes early. I watched from across the street as he stood near the entrance, checking his phone once, then looking up. There was something unfamiliar in seeing him outside the context of recovery. Not because he was different, but because I wasn't bracing myself for care. I wasn't waiting for instructions. I was just there. When I approached, he smiled. Not the professional one I'd grown used to, but something softer. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We sat. No rush. No plan. Just 2 people learning how to start again without the frame that had previously defined them. The conversation came easily, more easily than I expected. We talked about small things at first, how the neighborhood had changed, how spring was moving too fast this year, how Elena was efficient in a way that made time disappear. Jamie laughed at that. "She's a machine," he said. "I train with her. She doesn't waste words." "You two are opposites then," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Because I talk too much." "No, because you don't say things until they matter." He was quiet for a second. "Like now?" I nodded. "Like now." He leaned forward slightly. "I didn't step away because I wanted to. I stepped away because I had to." "I know." I kept thinking, maybe if I just waited until you were fully healed, things would get easier to manage. But they didn't. The longer we worked together, the harder it became to separate what I felt from what I was supposed to feel. I looked down at my hands. "I get it." He waited for me to continue. "I didn't know what was happening at first," I said. "I thought maybe it was just grateful, or projecting, or confused. But it wasn't confusion. It was clarity, uncomfortable, maybe, but real. I didn't want to risk blurring the line," he said. "But I think the line blurred anyway." We sat with that for a while. It wasn't an admission of love. It wasn't a declaration. It was something quieter, acknowledgement, that what had started in the space between care and dependence had grown into something else. Something not yet defined, but undeniably present. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Not today. I just wanted to know if you felt it too." I nodded. "I do." Another pause. Not heavy this time. Just full. "It feels strange," I added, "sitting here without instructions. Without steps to follow." He smiled. "You're allowed to just sit. No progress markers required. I don't know what this is going to be. Neither do I. But I'd like to find out." Jamie reached for his cup, then paused, reconsidering. "Then let's take our time. No expectations. Just room to figure it out." I exhaled slowly, tension I hadn't realized I was carrying finally easing. We stayed for nearly an hour. The conversation drifted from recovery to books, from coffee preferences to weekend markets. There was no pressure, no urgency, just presence. When we stood to leave, I hesitated. Then, without thinking too much, I said, "Thank you for doing it the right way." He looked confused for a moment. For stepping back, I clarified. "You didn't cross a line when it would have been easy to. That matters." His expression softened. "So does honesty and waiting. If it's real, it'll still be here." I nodded. "I think it is." He walked me to the corner, then stopped. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Same place. Unless you want to upgrade to a park bench." I smiled. "Maybe. We'll see how adventurous I feel." As we parted, there was no hug, no touching, just the warmth of shared understanding. For the first time, we were standing on even ground. Not patient and caregiver, not obligations and rules, but people, with choices. And in that moment, I realized that something true doesn't have to rush. It just needs space. And now we had it. Alex hadn't expected recovery to feel this empty. After his spinal surgery, he returned home to a silence he wasn't ready for. The physical pain was one thing, dull, steady, predictable. But it was the daily frustration of helplessness that wore him down. He couldn't bend to pick things up, couldn't shower safely without support, couldn't sleep through the night without shifting uncomfortably, trying not to make it worse. With no family nearby and friends busy with their own lives, Alex finally reached out to a care agency. A few hours later, Jamie arrived. No drama, no judgment, just a quiet, competent presence who asked questions gently and listened carefully. At first, it was all business. Medications, mobility exercises, daily hygiene routines. Jamie moved with a kind of still confidence that didn't crowd the space, but also didn't retreat from it. He noticed things when Alex tensed before moving, when he skipped lunch out of frustration, when the pain was worse, but he didn't say it out loud. Over time, their conversations grew beyond medical updates. They talked about food, music, bad movies. The pauses between words became more comfortable. Jamie didn't push, but he stayed present, the kind of presence that made silence feel okay. One morning, Alex stood in the kitchen, struggling to wash his hair over the sink. He'd almost gotten used to the discomfort, but that day it felt like too much. Water spilled down his back. His neck ached. His grip was weak. Without asking, Jamie stepped in. "I could help," he said. Just that. Alex hesitated, embarrassed. But Jamie's tone carried no weight, no pressure, just an offer. The moment that followed was simple: a small chair, a towel, running water. Jamie worked calmly, gently washing Alex's hair without turning it into anything bigger than what it was, a moment of care. There was no discomfort, no awkwardness, only stillness. And in that stillness, something changed. From that day forward, their connection took on a quiet depth. No one said anything directly, but both noticed the small shifts: a longer pause, a softer look, the way their words slowed when they spoke to each other. On one of their usual walks through the park, Jamie said, "You're almost back to full independence. Once you are, someone else will probably take over for me." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. The message was there. Alex nodded. He understood. Jamie wasn't just talking about logistics. He was protecting the boundary between care and something else, something growing quietly between them. The next week, another caregiver arrived. Jamie stepped back, professionally and respectfully. And then he texted, "Coffee." They met at a cafe nearby. Their first meeting as just two people, not caregiver and patient. No pressure, no roles, just presence. They talked about real things. And when the conversation turned more honest, more vulnerable, they didn't pull away. Jamie thanked Alex for his trust. Alex said, "This wasn't an accident. It was someone choosing to be there for me when I had nothing to offer, and never taking advantage of that." They left the cafe without holding hands. Not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't need the gesture to prove what was already understood. Months passed. Their connection continued, slow and steady. No expectations, just quiet honesty. Exactly 1 year after the surgery, they returned to the same park bench where that conversation about boundaries had taken place. Alex walked there on his own. Jamie was waiting. They sat together, talked about what had changed, and then, without fanfare, they reached for each other's hands. No performance, no grand moment, just a choice. Not an accident, not a coincidence. A quiet, mutual decision. To care, to stay, to keep choosing each other. And in that simple act of presence, everything made sense.